Good afternoon, children. I hope that you have had a really good first day of term. I know that Noah has worked very hard trying to get through some of the activities that we have sent out to you today. I hope that you have been really nice to your lovely mums and dads that are trying to be teachers, and I hope you've been patient with them because, of course, they might have found it a little bit tricky. So I hope that you've really enjoyed what we've planned for you so far and that you've been nice to your mums and dads about it. And, just give us some feedback. Tell us what you really enjoyed. Tell us what you really didn't like. And then we can either say, well, too bad for you. You'll have to do it anyway. Or we might make some changes and see if we can things make even more fun than they are. Okay? So just let us know. Machine and I would love to find out from you. Okay, the last chapter of the Brothers Lionheart. Remember that in a wild chase, that the Tanglemen were chasing Orvar and Jonathan and Carl as they escaped from Kamanyaka and came over the bridge, and that they came closer and closer. And at the last minute, Carl hopped off the horse to hide in that tree, and that from a distance he saw Sophia, and lo and behold, they clearly hadn't had the message, which means that Jossie was still there. And yesterday we ended up with Sophia forcing Jossie to open his shirt and so that she could see the mark of Katla on his chest that Kader and Vader had burned on his chest when they were in the mountains. Right, and then Jossie died as well. Oh, I almost forget. Remember, he was trying to escape and he went into his rowing boat and he fell over Karma Falls. Gosh, it was such an awful little chapter. Let's see. Today is the chapter of the last battle. The day of the battle, the day everyone had been waiting for, came at last. There was a storm over Wild Rose Valley that day, so that the trees were bent over and broken. But it wasn't that kind of storm Orvar had meant when he had said, "The storm of liberation will come and it will break the oppressors. And when a tree breaks and falls, it will go forward with a roar, sweeping away our slavery and finally freeing us again." That's what Orvar had said. He had spoken like that in Matthias's kitchen, to which people had come in secret to hear him and see him. Yes, they wanted to see him and Jonathan. "You two, you are our comfort and our hope. You are all we have," they said when they came creeping to Matthias's house in the evenings, although they knew how dangerous it was. Because they want to hear about the storm of liberation, just tormenting and punishing Wild Rose Valley, which is why they hated him even more passionately than before, and why even more weapons were being forged in the valley. From Cherry Valley, more and more freedom fighters came to help. Sophia and Hubert had an army camp in the deepest depths of the forest near Elfrida. Sophia sometimes came through the underground passage at night, and in Matthias's kitchen they made their battle plans, she and Orvar and Jonathan. I lay there, listening to them as I was sleeping on the sofa bed in the kitchen, now that Orvar needed a place in the hideout. Every time Sophia came, she said, "Here's my savior. I didn't forget to thank you, did I now, Carl?" And then Orvar said every single time that I was the hero of Wild Rose Valley. But I could only think about Jossie out in the dark waters, and I feel sad. Sophia also arranged for a supply of bread for Wild Rose Valley. It was brought over the mountains from Cherry Valley in wagons and smuggled through the underground passage. Matthias went round with a pack on his back and in secret shared it out around the houses. I hadn't known before that people could be so happy with nothing but a little bit of bread. And now I saw it because I went with Matthias on his walks, and I saw how the people in the valley were suffering, and I heard them talk about the battle they were longing for so much. I was frightened of that day, and yet I almost began to long for it too in the end, because it was unbearable to go on waiting, and dangerous too, Jonathan said. "You can't keep so much so secret for so long," he said to Orvar. "Our dream of liberation could be crushed so easily." And he was right about that. It needed only one tangleman to find that underground passage, or a renewed search of houses so that Jonathan and Orva were discovered in the hideout. Only that it would take for everything to go wrong, and I shuddered at the very thought of it. But the tanglemen must have been both blind and deaf, or they would surely have noticed something. If they had listened just a little, they would have been able to hear how that storm of liberation was beginning to rumble, the storm that was soon going to shake the whole of Wild Rose Valley. But they didn't. The night before the day of the battle, I was lying in my sofa bed, unable to sleep because of the storm outside and because of my own anxiety. It had been decided that the battle would start at dawn the next morning. Orva and Jonathan and Matthias were sitting at the table talking about it, and I was laying there listening. Orva spoke the most. He talked and talked. His eyes were glowing. He was longing for the morning more than anyone else. This is how it has to go, as far as I could make out from their talk. The guards at the main gateway and the river gateway were to be struck down first, so that the gates could be opened for Sophia and Hubert, who would then ride in with their forces. Sophia through the main gateway and Hubert through the river gateway. And then we must be victorious together or die, said Orva. It must go quickly, he said. The valley must be freed of all tanglemen and the gateways closed again before Tangle had time to bring Katla, because there was no weapon against Katla. She could not be defeated in any other way except by starvation, Orva said. Neither spears, nor arrows, nor swords affect her, he said. And one tiny little lick of her fire is enough to paralyze or kill anyone. But if Tangle has Katla over there in his mountains, what's the use of liberating Wild Rose Valley, I said. With her, he can quell you again, just as he did the first time. He has given us a wall to protect. Don't worry about Tangle, Orva said, for in the evening he and Jonathan, Sophia and some others were to penetrate into Tangle's castle, overwhelm his guard, and finish him off right there before he was even aware of the rebellion in the valley. And then they would chain up Katla in her cave until she grew so weak and starved that one day they could kill her. There is no other way of getting rid of such a monster, said Orva. And then he spoke of how swiftly they must rid the valley of all tanglemen, and Jonathan said, Rid? Get rid? Do you mean kill? Yes, what else do you think I mean, said Orva. No, said Jonathan, I can't kill anyone, you know that, Orva. Not even if it's question of your own life, said Orva. No, not even then, said Jonathan. Orva couldn't understand it, and neither could Matthias, hardly. If everyone were like you, said Orva, then evil would reign forever. But then I said that if everyone were like Jonathan, there wouldn't be any evil. And then I didn't say anything else for the rest of the evening, except when Matthias came and tucked me up. And then I whispered to him, I'm frightened, Matthias. And Matthias patted me and said, So am I. All the time, Jonathan had to promise Orva that he would ride around in the confusion of battle to give other people the courage to do what he himself could not or would not do. The people of Wild Rose Valley must see you, said Orva. They must see both of us. And then Jonathan said, Well, if I must, I must. But I saw how pale he was in the light of the one little candle in the kitchen. We had had to leave Grim and Fjallar in the forest with Elfrida when we had come back from Katla Cavern, but it had been decided that Sophia was to bring them with her when she rode through the main gate on the day of the battle. What I was to do had also been decided. I was to do nothing, only wait until it was all over. Jonathan had said that. I was to sit quite alone at home in the kitchen and wait. No one slept much that night. And then the morning came. Yes, the morning came and the day of the battle. Oh, how sick at heart I was that day. I saw and heard more than enough of blood and cries, because they were fighting on the slopes below Matthias's house. I saw Jonathan riding around, the storm tearing at his hair, and all about him nothing but fighting, and flashing swords, and whistling spears, and flying arrows, and cries, cries. And I said to Fjallar, if Jonathan dies, then I want to die too. Yes, I had Fjallar with me in the kitchen. I had thought of not telling anyone about it, but I had to have him right there with me. I couldn't be alone. I just couldn't. Fjallar also looked out of the window at what was happening on the slopes below, and then he whinnied. I don't know whether that was because he wished to join Grim or whether he was as frightened as I was. Frightened I was, frightened. I saw Vader fall to Sophia's spear, and I saw Kader die by Orva's sword. I saw Doddick too, and several more falling right and left, and Jonathan riding there in the middle of it all, the storm tearing at his hair, his face growing paler and paler, and my heart grew more and more sick within me. And then the end came. Many cries were heard in Wildrose Valley that day, but one came that was like no other. In the middle of the battle, a battle horn sounded through the storm, and a cry went up, Cutlass coming! Cutlass coming! And then came the scream, Cutlass' scream of hunger, which everyone knew oh too well. Swords and spears and arrows fell to the ground, and they who were fighting could fight no more, because they knew there was no saving them now. Nothing but the thunder of the storm and Tangle's battle horn and Cutlass' screams could be heard in the valley, and then Cutlass' fire hissed out, killing everyone whom Tangle pointed at, and he pointed, and he pointed, and his cruel face was dark with evil. To look at anything, only Jonathan, I had to know where he was, and I saw him just below Matthias's house, sitting there on Grim, pale and still, and the storm still tearing at his hair. Jonathan! I cried. Jonathan, can you hear me? But he didn't hear me, and I saw him spur on his horse and fly down the slope like an arrow, flying faster than anyone in heaven or on earth had ever flown. I know he was flying towards Tangle, and he flew past him. And then the battle horn sounded again, but it was Jonathan who was blowing it now. He had snatched it out of Tangle's hand, and I was blowing it, and was blowing it so that it resounded, so that Cutlass should know that she had a new master. And then it was quite quiet, even the storm dying down. Everyone fell silent, just waiting. Tangle was sitting taut with fear on his horse, waiting, and Cutler was waiting too. Once again, Jonathan blew on the horn. I'll show you the picture. Once again, Jonathan blew on his horn. Then Cutler screamed and turned in rage on the man that she had once obeyed so blindly. Tangle's time will come one day, Jonathan had said. I remembered. And it had come now. That was the end of the day of battle in Wildrose Valley. Many people had given their lives for the sake of freedom. Yes, it was free now, their valley, but the dead were lying there and did not know it. Matthias was dead too, and I no longer had a grandfather. Hubert was dead, the first to fall. He had never even got through the river gateway, because there he had met Tangle and his soldiers, and worst of all, he had met Cutler. Tangle had brought her with him that very day to punish Wildrose Valley for the last time for Oscar's escape. He had not known it was the day of battle, though when he realized it, no doubt he had been glad he had Cutler with him. But he was dead now, Tangle, just as dead as the others. Our tormentor is no more, said Orva. Our children will be able to live in freedom and be happy. Soon, Wildrose Valley will be just like it was before. But I thought that Wildrose Valley would never be as before, not for me, without Matthias. Orva had received a sword wound on his back, but it was as if he didn't even feel it, or he didn't mind about it. His eyes were just as glowing as he spoke to the people in the valley. We shall be happy again, he said over and over again. There were many people who cried that day in Wildrose Valley, but not Orva. Sophia was alive, not even wounded, and was now to return to Cherry Valley, she and all her surviving warriors. She came to us to say farewell outside Matthias's house. This was where Matthias lived. Hold on a second, I'm going to close the door in Noah's room. No, Noah's shouting. There I am again, sorry. So Tangle was dead, but not Orva. Everybody cried that day in Wildrose Valley, but not Orva. Sophia was alive, not even wounded, and was now to return to Cherry Valley, she and all her surviving warriors. She came to us to say farewell outside Matthias's house. This was where Matthias lived, she said, crying a little bit, and then she embraced Jonathan. Come home to Knight's Farm soon, she said. I'll think of you every moment until we meet again. And then she looked at me. Carl, are you coming with me then? No, I said. No, I want to go with Jonathan. I was so afraid that Jonathan would send me away with Sophia, but he didn't. I'd like to have Carl with me, he said. On the slope below Matthias' house, Katla was lying like a horrible great lump, silent and satiated with blood. Now and again, she would look at Jonathan like a dog looking to find out what his master wants. She touched no one now, but as long as she was lying there, terror lay over the valley and no one dared to be happy. Wildrose Valley could neither celebrate its freedom nor grieve for its dead as long as Katla existed. The only person who could get her back to her cave was Jonathan. Will you help Wildrose Valley just once more, said Orva. If you take her there and chain her up, then I will do the rest when the time has come. Okay, said Jonathan. One last time I will help you, Orva. Now I know how you should travel along rivers. You should ride slowly and watch the river flowing down there, the water glittering, the willow trees' branches dancing in the wind, and you shouldn't travel there with a dragon at your heels. But that's what we did, listening to the heavy tramp of her feet behind us. Thump, thump, thump. She sounded so alarming as she walked that Grim and Fjallar almost went mad. We could hardly hold them. Now and again Jonathan blew the horn, but that was a horrible sound too, and Katla certainly didn't like it, but she had to obey when she heard it. That was the only thing that would comfort us on our ride. We didn't speak to each other at all, Jonathan and I. We just rode as hard as we could. Jonathan had to chain Katla up in her cave before night and darkness fell, and there she would die. And then we would never see her again, and we would forget that there was such a country as Carmanyaca. The mountains of the ancient mountains could stand there for all eternity, but we would never travel that way again, Jonathan had promised me. It grew still towards the evening, stormy no longer, but a calm, warm evening, and it was beautiful when the sun had set, just the kind of evening in which you should ride along rivers without being afraid, I thought. But I didn't let Jonathan see it, that I was afraid, I mean. At last we reached Kama Falls. Carmanyaca, here we are for the last time, said Jonathan, as we rode across the bridge, and then he blew his horn once more. Katla saw her cliff on the other side of the river. She clearly wanted to go there, because an eager hissing came from her, right at Grim's hocks. She shouldn't have done that, for then it happened. Grim shied away in terror against the bridge rail, and I screamed because I thought Jonathan was going to go head first into Kama Falls. But he didn't, though the horn flew out of his hand and vanished into the rushing water below. Katla's cruel eyes had seen it all, and now she knew she no longer had a master. Then she screamed. A fire began to stream out of her nostrils. We rowed to save our wretched lives. How we rowed over the bridge and up the path towards Tangle's castle with Katla hissing after us. That path, it zigzagged its way up through the mountains of the ancient mountains, and not even in a dream could anything have been so terrible as to flee from ledge to ledge with Katla after you. Her fire almost licking the horses' hocks. A flame shot horribly close to Jonathan, and for one terrible moment I thought he'd been burned, but he cried, "Don't stop! Ride on!" Poor Grim and Fjaller. Katla harried them so that they almost burst, trying to get away from her. Up the path they raced, through twists and turns, the leather spattering from them, racing faster and faster until they could make themselves do no more. But by then Katla had fallen behind too, and was screaming with rage. She was on her own ground now, and no one was going to get away from there. Her thump increased its pace, and I knew she would win in the end, in all her stubborn cruelty. We went on riding for a long, long time like that, and I had given up all hope of rescue. We had come quite a way up the mountain now, and were still ahead. We could see Katla immediately below us on a narrow rock ledge above Kama Falls. She stopped there for a while, because this was her cliff. It was here she used to stand and stare, and that's what she decided now too. Almost reluctantly she stopped and stared down into the waterfall, fire and smoke pouring out of her nostrils as she tramped impatiently back and forth. But then she remembered us, and she glared up at us with her smouldering eyes. "You cruel thing," I thought. "You cruel, cruel thing. Why don't you stay there on your ledge?" But I knew she would come. She would come. We had reached the great rock where we had seen her thrusting out her terrible head the first time we had ever come. Suddenly our horses could go no further. It is horrible when your horse collapses beneath you. But that was what happened. Grim and Fjaller just sank down onto the path, and if we had previously hoped for a miracle to save us, now there was nothing for it but to give up hope. We were lost, we knew, and Katla knew it too. A look of devilish triumph coming into her eyes, she stood quite still on her ledge and glared up at us. I thought she was laughing, but she was in no hurry now. It was as if she were thinking, "I'll come all in good time. You can expect me, don't worry." Jonathan looked at me in that kind way of his. "Forgive me, Rusky," he says. "Forgive me for dropping the horn," he said, "but I couldn't help it." I wanted to tell Jonathan that I had never had anything to forgive him for, but I was struck dumb with fear. Katla stayed down there, fire and smoke coming out in spurts from her nostrils, and her feet began to tramp. We were standing sheltering behind the great rock so that her flames could not reach us. I was holding on to Jonathan hard. I held on so hard, and he looked at me with tears in his eyes. And then a great rage came over him. He was so angry all of a sudden, and he leaned forwards and shouted at Katla down there, "You! You may not touch Rusky! Do you hear, you monster, you! You may not touch Rusky or else!" And he grasped the rock as if he were a giant and could frighten her. He was no giant, and he could not frighten Katla, but the rock was lying loose on the edge of that precipice. "Neither spears nor arrows nor swords affect Katla," Orvar had said. He could have also said that neither do rocks, however large the rock is. And Katla wasn't killed by the rock which Jonathan tipped onto her, but it fell straight on her and with a scream which could demolish mountains, she fell backwards into the Kama Falls. You see the falls over here on this side and the rock that's being pushed onto her. She fell down. Actually, there is one more chapter. There is a chapter 16. Shall we just continue reading this one? No, I'll do that tomorrow. The very last chapter. I thought today was the last chapter, but it's actually tomorrow. So my lovely friends, you've got something to look forward to tomorrow. Okay? The very last chapter. I wonder who's going to die next. It seems like everybody might be dying. And it's such a sad story. I hope it will finish in a really positive note. You too? Okay. I'll see you tomorrow, guys. Bye.